Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of What's on My Desk. And today I got a pretty cool variety for you. I brought a pretty rare limited Urwerk. I'm going to talk to you guys about painted or cloisonné dials, as well as I brought a watch which I would consider a time capsule, right? And on top of that, we're going to discuss, or at least I'm going to ask you guys, what do you think is the most recognizable plain Jane watch out there today? And by plain Jane, I mean daytime only watch, right after the intro.
Yeah.
Of course, it seems like I have a lot more watches here that I usually show on What's on My Desk. That's because I'm just going to use a few of them as examples rather than go into details. So let's start with the rare Urwerk, right? What we have here is a UR105 TF, and this thing glares like crazy. Look, I can see myself. That's because of the crystal. Now, I've discussed Urwerks before. The last Urwerk I had on this channel was the white gold 202. That one was in white gold. This is actually titanium. Love the multicolor case. You have a titanium finish with what seems like black accents in the back and a black, I guess we can call this bezel. But what I love about this is that the titanium comes through in the pieces here, sort of giving it a multi-dimensional look as well as a multicolor look. And speaking of color, this is a very, very colorful dial. Now, this is a limited edition. Well, you may have seen this watch with orange colors, right? This is the one with the red. What they did is they made them for various regions in limited editions. This is a limited edition of only 15 pieces made. Now, much like the 202 I guys showed you in the last video, this utilizes that same innovation, that same technology, which we first saw in the Opus 5, right? When Felix Baumgartner, along with Max Buser, created the Opus 5 Harry Winston, which I actually showed recently. And again, the idea is you have, in the older ones, you had these turning cubes, which would show you what time it is, with the bottom hand actually pointing at the hour. Right now, this would be, let's say, 8:30. And then the next cube would line up. Where here, it's pretty much the same technology, except it's done via discs rather than those turning cubes, right? But the concept is more or less the same. I also discussed in the past how aggressive you want to use the watch, and this is what this fancy lever is here for. So obviously doing things like playing tennis or running or doing some sort of vigorous activity would require for this watch to work harder. Of course, while you're resting, you don't really need this watch to work as aggressive. As I turn this lever, certainly reminiscent of a turbine engine. Let me just get that going, and you'll see how fast the rotors go to work when I have it set at full. Of course, when I have it set at stop, the rotors will not turn. Now, I explained this to you guys in layman's terms, but if you want to get a little more technical, the two turbines, Urwerk actually dubs them as turbines. They're coupled to the rotor, and they control the winding of the mechanism. If you set it at full, this thing will literally wind at the slightest movement. Like I'm just literally doing this to the watch, and it's already winding itself. And of course, if I stop it, it won't wind it at all. Let's talk monies, and I talked to you guys about independence. They tend not to hold their value. I think the market is slowly waking up to the fact that these are the future collectibles. These are the most innovative timepieces out there to begin with. These are those future collectibles, as I dub them. You know, a watch like this won't discount much. This watch retails for $70,000, $75,000, and you'd be hard pressed to find one of these because they only made 15. And people that bought them, you know, or got to buy them, I should say, you know, will hold on to them. I don't even know how I got my hands on one of these. You're looking to pay, you know, about 30% off retail. So, you know, get ready to shell out $50,000 if you're looking to pick up a watch such as this, and if you're into this kind of stuff. Let's move right along to Cloisonné. Anytime you look at big auction results, you notice these big brand names fetch buku dollars for Cloisonné dial watches. So what is Cloisonné? Well, Cloisonné is actually an ancient technique of applying enamel, most widely used on decorative objects such as bowls, vases, and things of that nature. The Ming Dynasty did it, right? It dates back as far as Egypt, and of course the watch industry wasn't far behind when they decided to utilize Cloisonné or enamel and create these beautiful, what I call works of art. Now, I didn't bring a super expensive Cloisonné watch because I don't happen to have one. I brought one that actually can be picked up relatively cheap from Jacques Drove. And this one depicts a picture of tigers, as you can see here.
They're great!
Now, Cloisonné means to partition. Partitions are normally created using like gold strands, and they kind of outline the design, and then enamel is then introduced into the spaces between, creating colored inlays. with the gold still visible at the end of the process. This is usually what you'll find in Cloisonné dial watches. Also, it's very hard to do this because enamel has to be heated up from 800 to 1200 degrees Celsius. That's super, super hot. So this is a very painstaking process when you apply Cloisonné onto dials. And this is why there weren't many made out there, which is why when you see true Cloisonné pieces from the 50s, which was the heyday of Cloisonné, as I would say it, or Art Deco in general, because it's very Art Deco-ish, right? Watchmakers were very cautious in regards to, making many Cloisonné watches, because at the end of the day, it was still a painting, a design, right? A piece of art, if you will, and the motif could often mean that, if someone doesn't like that motif, that watch would have a very, very long shelf life. Therefore, they didn't make very many. And those are the ones that are super rare and fetch beaucoup dollars when it comes to auction prices. Of course, last but not least, if you think about it, no two pieces were alike. If they made 10 of something or 5 of something, they made them in very limited numbers, but if let's say they made a few, each piece was technically unique because it's a unique painting, right, by an artist, right? Even if the same artist did it, you will never find 2 watches that are exactly the same. A lot of the collectors value enamel for the fact that this is something that never tarnishes, rusts, or fades, unlike metals and things of that nature. Rolex, Patek, Vacheron, Omega, and many, many other brands were involved in doing these. And again, these are the most sought after and highly collectible pieces today. If you ask any connoisseur watch collector, one is into vintage stuff, a true Cloisonné watch from the past is definitely on top of their list to have. A couple of notable examples: Patek 1415 from the late 40s sold for $730,000. Another notable example would be a Rolex 5028. I think it was back in 2015 or 2014. It sold for $1.2 million in auction. So when I say beaucoup dollars, I really mean beaucoup dollars. And that particular Rolex was actually done by Marguerite Koch, who was a very renowned artist that did work for Rolex, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron Constantin alike. If you ever come across one of those pieces somewhere in the flea market, fine, consider yourself a millionaire, because those things are super rare and very, very hard to find. Not something an average Joe can afford, I should say. But I wanted to bring that up because when I start doing these What's on My Desk, I always try to make things different. I don't try to do what everybody else does, go over the latest news. People ask me about the lawsuits that went on, right? La California company that just got sued by Rolex and current events. Whenever I get out in the YouTube space and I see the videos that pop up in my feed, I always see the news that I have already read. So I week in, week out, I try to pick something different. And speaking of different, let's talk about what I said in the very beginning, and that is time capsule. Roman, what the hell are you talking about time capsule? Well, let me show you something that you may not find as pretty as Cloisonné dials, but nevertheless, it's super appealing. So I have a couple of boxes here. Spoiler alert, Piaget, right? And you'll notice another box with some Arabic writing on it. So what is this? This is a time capsule because this is something that's very, very old that has been preserved in its new old stock condition. Here you will find a certificate of authenticity that dates back to 1987, right? This was sold in the Sultanate of Oman. With the Sultanate of Oman. Now this paper is not yellowed. It actually came this way. At first I was like, oh my God, it's such an old paper, probably got yellowed. No, it's been sitting, like you can even tell that this hasn't ever been even handled, like the edges are all perfect on it. Box is obviously reminiscent of a very famous Piaget watch, but that, spoiler alert, that's not the watch that's in there. What's in here is this particular Piaget. At a glance, very gaudy, very 1970s, 1980s, right? But this indeed is new old stock. Now, what is this watch? Now, you'll see an emblem in the front, as well as a very peculiar sign in the back with Arabic writing.
That's a penis.
I'm not going to pretend that I know how to read Arabic. Instead, what I'm going to do is read exactly what a friend of mine from the Middle East wrote to me in regards to what that symbol signifies. Of course, before I do, this watch also came with a very gaudy necklace. In that necklace, you will also see the same emblem that you see in the front of the watch, as well as this emblem in the back of the watch, which this is obviously a picture of a mosque.
Obviously.
You can obviously tell that that's a picture of a mosque dome. It comes with a pretty cool chain, right? Again, diamond bezel to mimic the watch. The shape of the pendant is to mimic the watch. Its original packages as it came back in 1987. The watch and the necklace were made in celebration of the Islamic New Year 1400, aka the Hijri year, which starts with Muharram. That's 50 years ago. At the back, name of the Prophet Muhammad and the words of wisdom which he shared at Hijrah, carefully engraved. And he goes on to write the words out in Arabic, which again, I cannot read. Now, here's the funny part about this watch is this watch was, if you notice, something doesn't add up, right? If we look at the papers of this watch, they're dated back to 9/21/1987. Well, it's 2020, doesn't add up. What makes this watch even more of a time capsule is this watch was actually made 50 years ago. So this watch was originally manufactured in 1970. This watch actually sat with the dealer from 1970 to 1987 until it was actually sold to a client who then in turn took it, as you see it here, put it in the safe and never actually wore it. Again, there's so many prime examples of stuff like this. In fact, I like to keep stuff like this around my office. Like, here's a vintage of one of the first Porsche design watches that was ever made in its original packaging, in its original box, and the original hang tag. You know, this is a watch that trades probably for around $1,500 today, maybe a little more, especially in new old stock. But this, to me, is a time capsule, and this is something that's going to sit on top of my safe at the moment. As you see it, all packaged up in its original packaging, because to me, this is a time capsule. Like, this is a watch I want to give to my, God willing, one of my grandchildren one day. Of course, I have another guy here from Omega. Again, a no big deal Omega, probably about $1,000 watch, but all the packaging, all the paperwork, everything that came with it. I love this kind of stuff, right? Of course, keeping this particular set for decoration would be a bit more cost prohibitive. I can't imagine what this cost back in 1970 or 1987, whenever this thing was sold. Based on our cost, I know we're selling this watch somewhere in the high 60s. For someone who is a lover of new old stock stuff, this is an antique at this point as far as I'm concerned. Yes, it's not a vintage Rolex. Yes, it's not a vintage Patek, and maybe it doesn't have the appeal of those most collectible ones, but there's plenty of collectors out there that like, for lack of a better word, different or weird stuff.
Different!
And this falls into that category. But most of all, what I wanted to show off is that new old stock time capsule feel. There's a lot of collectors out there that absolutely love that stuff. New old stock dating back 50 years is a hell of a find across any brand, if you ask me. Not a whole lot of 50-year-old new old stock Rolexes out there, or Pateks, or things for that nature, right? But stuff like this can still be found. And the fact that it signifies something special make it even that much more of a special watch. Last but not least, let's talk about most recognizable plain Jane watch. If I said that to you right now, and by plain Jane again, I mean time only watch or time and date only watch, right? The very first thing most of you probably think of is gonna throw it at me is Nautilus, Royal Oak, and some of you may say Vacheron Overseas, right? Well, speaking of plain Jane, I'm actually wearing something very plain Jane on my wrist today. Something that's not in my realm of usual things I would wear. But we received this ellipse, right? Now, the Patek ellipse is an iconic watch all of its own. I'm not going to get into the details of that. I think I spoke to that when I briefly talked about Patek Philippe's history. For me, what did it was the fact that it's the rose against the black, which is a combination that I absolutely love. It's a dressy, easy to wear, light, precious metal watch. And that's why I've been kicking this thing around for the last couple of days. So plain Jane, right? So here's your Vacheron Overseas. Here's a plain Jane Royal Oak. And here's the Nautilus, the coveted 5711, all priced wildly different, with Vacheron coming in dead last in terms of price. Now, you guys have always asked me, why is Vacheron Constantine not discounting as much? It's actually very simple. The answer to that question is extremely simple. Vacheron dealers only get 25% off discount versus 40% off discount on their regular lines. Number one. Number two, allocation is extremely limited, much in the likes of these Royal Oaks as well as the Nautiluses, and that's why you see them up there trading for close to retail. Perhaps in the case of this particular dial, this is probably be the cheapest option you can find out there. When you start getting into the blue dials, and again, this is not the plain Jane, I'm sorry, I just wanted to show you the blue dial. This is actually the dual time, but the plain Jane blue dial such as this trades way over list, and rightfully so. Honestly, looks wise, if you just compare the dials for now, I know they're different watches, but looks wise, but this electric blue dial is absolutely outstanding. In fact, I think it's the best looking blue dial out there, because if you take this blue dial and then let's look at the AP blue dial, right, and then at the same token the Nautilus blue dial, it's almost gray, right? I think Vacheron definitely takes the cake on that. So my question to you, or a challenge back to you guys, in comment below, let me know, or email me Roman Sharf at luxurybazaar.com, as you already know. Which, in your opinion, is the most recognizable plain Jane watch out there? Now, again, you may name other watches as well. These are the ones I happen to have, so these are the ones I happen to have brought. So feel free to name any other watches out there. And I'm not going to answer that question on my own. This, again, is a challenge to you guys. So I want you to comment below, or better yet, email me and let me know which do you think is the most recognizable plain Jane watch out there. I will tell you this, price-wise, obviously, the Nautilus, Royal Oak, and then the Vacheron. If you want to talk about it iconically, obviously both the Nautilus and the Royal Oak are in the same boat. Gerald Genta designed both of them, the Royal Oak in 72 and the Nautilus in 74. Where Vacheron, if you want to talk about icons or iconic companies overall, they certainly take the cake because they're the oldest running watch company out there. So very tough choice for me. I'm hoping you guys are up to the challenge. Guys, this is it for me, but one announcement before I go. Ian walked in today and said, hey, I'm not getting enough submissions for real watches, real people, real stories. So guys, get your iPhones out, your cameras, whatever it is you have. Show me what you're wearing. We managed to put together 2 episodes. You guys like them very much, but they're not possible for us to do unless you guys submit. Ian did get a few submissions since the last episode. So I ask you again to submit those videos to Ian at luxurybazaar.com, but that's the only thing that's gonna keep that playlist alive, if you will, right? And I'm specifically interested in the stories behind those watches, whether they're good or bad. You don't have to show your face if you don't want to, just do a video over your watch. If you want to show your face, I'll be happy to meet you virtually just the same. Other than that, you guys know what to do for this video. Hit the like button, subscribe if you're not a subscriber. Share this with your friends. This is what helps my channel grow organically, and I'll see you guys next week for more watch reviews and other videos.